So everybody, this is Lindsay Owens. Lindsay is a PhD. She is the executive director of the Groundwork Collaborative. In her bio here, I'm just going to read it. Lindsay is widely known for her ability to communicate pressing economic concepts and arguments. And she is, her focus is to help us understand inflation by leading the charge to expose and articulate the role of firm pricing power and corporate profiteering. And that's very much, I think, what we're going to be talking about today. Did I get all that right, or did I mess
You got
anything
it. You got
Awesome.
it perfectly right.
So, Lindsay, when I was prepping for this, I was listening to some of your different podcasts, and I was reading some of the articles that Kat had sent over to me, and I felt like the Instacart thing, the Instacart situation is it really tells the story in a way of like what you're trying to bring to all of our attention and what you're working on. And I feel like that we can get into the weeds a little bit more, but I would love if you're comfortable starting with the investigation that you guys did with Consumer Reports, what Instacart was doing, and would you be comfortable if we start there?
Yeah.
And you just
Happy
kind
to
of
talk
start
about
with that.
that.
Like, what can you tell us that story?
Yeah. So last summer, Groundwork Collaborative, the organization I run, teamed up with Consumer Reports and More Perfect Union, a video organization. And we were interested in exploring what was happening over at Instacart and how it might be impacting Americans' grocery prices. And we had a suspicion that Instacart might be running experiments on grocery shoppers. So, offering you one price for a box of cereal, offering me a different price for that same box of cereal, and using those experiments to kind of test the outer limits of what we might be willing to pay for every single item in our grocery cart. And the reason that we sort of had a suspicion that that might be happening is because in October of 2024, I was doing some research on pricing technology companies. And I came across a company called Eversight, and it was a new AI pricing tech company that basically sold the ability to kind of plug in turnkey style to your company and run pricing experiments to help you better understand how much you could be charging for everything. And Instacart actually bought Eversight back in 2022.
Oh, they
And
bought the
so,
company.
yeah, they
Wow.
didn't just contract with
Yeah.
Eversight, they acquired them. And so we thought, look, they made this acquisition in 2022. By the time that we do our study in 2025, like probably the reason that they bought this company that runs experiments on you while you shop for groceries was to run experiments on you while you shop for groceries.
It seems
So we were like, right. So we were like, okay, let's take a look and see if we can find it. And so this is where the like real genius of the Consumer Reports model comes in, because they recruited over 400 secret shoppers, basically, people who would log on to the Instacart app, buy the same 20 grocery items. We selected a set of breakfast and lunch and dinner and snack and produce and store brand and generic, right? We wanted to make sure we ran the gamut. And we had everyone buy the same 20 items or put the same 20 items in their cart, set the same checkout pickup location, and then they took screenshots of what was in their cart. And we collected all the screenshots, entered all the data. What did they charge you for each item? What was your basket total? And then we ran the numbers. And the results were really stunning. Some products were offered at as much as 23% more for some shoppers than other shoppers. So
wow.
that box of groceries or the box of Cheerios that you and I both have in our cart, I was getting charged 23% more than you. And it was just stunning. We're like, well, what could explain this? Like, is it demographic information? Did we miss something in the experiment? No, we went back and checked. We ran the numbers a second time, a third time. We controlled for your age, your gender, whether or not you'd shopped on Instacart before. And none of that really explained it. The only thing ultimately that could explain it is Instacart was running um, wide scale pricing experiments on millions of Americans while they shop for their groceries. And so we packaged up the findings and put a report together and gave it to Ben Castleman at the New York Times. And of course, like that's a pretty serious outlet. So he, reran the numbers himself and also reached out to Instacart for comment. And Instacart confirmed that everything that we had found was accurate. They actually confirmed every single price that was displayed because they're running this giant pricing lab, so
Sure.
they collected all this data, they store all this data. I think they found one error in like thousands of prices that we had. So we fixed that one and then went to press. But I think for many Americans, just this idea that there's no longer a standard public price or a standard predictable price, for the same item at the same store is really unnerving. It's just not how pricing has worked, frankly, for more than 150 years. We've kind of had, there hasn't been really a law requiring this, but there's been sort of a basic bargain, right? That there would be a posted price and that you and I would both access the posted price. And that this kind of new era of pricing experimentation and the new firms and AI tech companies, and some of them call
Mhm.
themselves rocket scientists of pricing, um,
Wow.
has really completely changed the ground under our feet. And I think it's really why Americans are so frustrated with high prices, but even more so, I think Americans are just frustrated with how pricing works. It
Sure.
doesn't feel transparent. It doesn't feel predictable.
No, and it's I mean, it's opportunistic to the extreme, right? And and
Yep.
and and just specifically with Instacart though, like they relented, right? After the press that came out, they said, "No, no, 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 we're not." Well, they sort of admitted it, right? And then they said, "Do I have that right?" And then they were like, "No, we're not going to do this. It was a bad idea," right? Was that sort of the end of it with Instacart at that point?
Yeah, there was like a 2-week kind of PR maelstrom for the company. There was a lot of bad press. The Trump's Federal Trade Commission said that they were going to launch a probe into
Mhm.
Instacart's pricing practices. A lot of people on TikTok, posted about the story, said they were going to boycott Instacart. I mean, I think it was the stock price plummeted. So it was a bad couple of weeks. And then, shortly before Christmas, I think it was December 22nd, about 2 weeks after we published the study, the company released a blog post in which they said, we got this one wrong. It's not fair for two people to pay different prices. We're ending our algorithmic pricing experiments on the platform.
Wow.
Yeah.
But uh, but that's not the end of it, right?
No.
You would think in any other era, right? I think I guess pre-social media, which is a different life anyway. But any other era, a scandal of that magnitude would be the end of it, whatever it is. But and you know, we, you could any other political era, a plethora of scandals would have been
Yeah.
the end of the politics of the moment. But in this era, that's just Tuesday.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it's a game of whack-a-mole for consumers and regulators. Yeah.
and now we have the Walmart story, right? Which
Yep.
Kat had sent me that Gizmodo story. I can't pull it up now because I'm also having technical issues with my
Oh,
my
yeah.
scenes here on my streaming platform. Walmart wins patents for AI powered price changes.
Yeah.
So there's can you tell there's so they're at this, right? There's two
Yeah.
patents. Can you tell us what's going on with that?
Yeah. Can I tell you a quick story about Coke?
Oh, sure.
Because you made a really interesting point, which is like this wouldn't have happened 20 years ago, but today, we're playing this game of whack-a-mole. So in the 90s, the CEO of Coke, his name was Doug Avester at the time, um, kind of admitted in an offhanded interview with a Brazilian news outlet that Coke was piloting installing thermometers in their vending machines. The idea being that, like, as the temperature rose, they could charge more for Coke because you would be extra thirsty.
Mhm.
And word got out. And this is, pre-TikTok,
Sure.
pre-viral posts. And this was the shot heard around the world. It was on the cover of every major newspaper, from, the Wall Street Journal to like the newspaper in Honolulu. And, Coke immediately walked it back. Pepsi, of course, seized on the gaffe. And, to this day, we don't have thermometers and vending machines,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like they touched the stove and then they, found another strategy. But yeah, I think the companies are so brazen today in their approach to building new technologies to overcharge you. And I think, increasingly the price of an item feels really untethered from things like the underlying cost, right? Like it didn't cost Kroger more to make the Cheerios for me than it cost Kroger to make the Cheerios for you. They just sort of thought maybe I would pay more or they could get me to pay more. And so what we've learned in the last couple of weeks about Walmart is really stunning. Um, Several years back, Walmart applied for patents that would protect new technologies they were building to get better at pricing. And about a week and a half ago, the U.S. Patent Office accepted and granted those patents. So they now own that technology and have monopoly rights to that technology. And I think even more so than the like nitty gritty details of the patents, which I'm happy to get into, I think what we learned when we saw those patents exposed is even America's low cost retailer, Walmart,
Mhm.
is laser focused on building new ways um, to test pricing, new ways to experiment with pricing, new ways to change pricing. And they're doing it all with your data. So they are very closely monitoring what you look at when you go to walmart.com and when you log on to the app. They're looking at what you put in your cart, what you click on but don't put in your cart, what you click on, put in your cart but never buy. They're looking at what you hover over. So
Wow.
just like, you're sort of just like thinking about it, right? Like you haven't really made your move yet. And they're tracking all of this and they're combining it with all sorts of other data that they have on you, maybe some personal data that you've forked over, maybe your shopping history because you're a longtime user of walmart.com or the app. Um, and they're using it to get better at pricing. Now, we don't know. We just know that they've patented the technology. We don't know if they've rolled it out. We don't know, how frequently it's being used, if it's being used. So it raises a lot of questions. I don't have all the answers, but I think what it says for damn sure is, low prices may very soon be a thing of the past. And the standard price for all Walmart shoppers may soon be a thing of the past. You and I may be charged different amounts based on how Walmart assesses our likelihood of being willing to pay more. We also know in this economy that Walmart's fastest growing market is actually wealthier customers. And
Wow.
so it doesn't surprise me that
Mhm.
they're sort of interested in exploring the outer bounds of the kind of willingness to pay of some of these new consumers who are coming into Walmart more regularly or even for the first time. Yeah.
That's so interesting because I just when you just said that, a little trigger went off in my head because I think I had caught an NPR back when I watch I consume too much news. I mean,
Me
it's what
too.
I do for a living, but so I was going to pick up my son and I have to have the news on, and I caught this story on NPR about trying. There was several months back. There was this economists seemed to be a little confused, right? They were like, "Well, why is consumer spending or why is consumer sentiment so low, but yet
Yeah.
consumer spending is so high, right?" And then there was this cohort of economists were like, "Well, that's because the wealthiest Americans are actually buying everything.
Yeah.
They are spending like drunken sailors right now. They're spending
Totally.
so much because the economy is so good for them that they're propping up the spending. So I guess if Walmart is kind of looking at this and trying to figure out what the future is going to be like for, a third world America, for example, an autocratic America, if God forbid we wind up, maybe that's maybe it makes sense to, maybe Walmart will become, I can't imagine they're going to become a luxury retailer. They're not going to be Nordstrom, but, but maybe they, and I'm not making excuses for them. They should be ashamed of
Yeah.
themselves because
Yeah.
they made the Walmart family made their fortune off of the backs of, middle class folks and low income folks who couldn't afford to shop anywhere else. That's who built them. So now, just to because I'm going to bounce around a little bit because there's so much to this story. I know I've
Yeah.
only got you for a half an hour, so I want to get a lot of stuff in here. Now, then when there's a story about the Washington Post, right, and
Yeah.
and and how they use this. Now that boggles my mind completely because the Washington Post is in trouble, right? They're hemorrhaging
Yeah.
subscribers. Yet they tried this, and they follow the law and admitted that they tried this.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't know if I should ask you why they tried this. Maybe it's a question for Jeff Bezos, but why would I mean nobody likes this who you know what I mean? Like consumers don't like this. Why would you
Yeah.
what it doesn't make any sense to me like why they would do it.
Yeah, look, these new disclosure laws, New York
Mm,
State passed the first disclosure law requiring companies to tell you if they use an algorithm and your personal data to set pricing, I think are very helpful for consumers. Like, they're not helpful for consumers in the sense that they don't stop these
right.
practices, but they definitely give us a naughty list of companies
Right.
who are doing this. And so this came to light. As Walmart reached, or as the Washington Post reached out to subscribers, and in the sort of buried in the fine print was this notification that your data and an algorithm was setting the price. And we learned that the Washington Post does effectively personalized pricing, what we might call surveillance pricing, use data that they collect about you to set a price just for you. And this sort of makes perfect sense when you think about a kind of dying media company like the Washington Post. They are, hemorrhaging subscribers in part because of Bezos, but just more generally, the sort of shift away from legacy media. And so they are offering, cut rate prices for folks who they're trying to get into the door to build new subscribers. But for folks who are sure thing, people who are longtime readers of the Post, people who might be wealthier, people who might have an institutional subscription, like you don't have to pay for your subscription yourself, your employer pays for it. They're doing what they can to really drive up the price for those customers. And that's what personalized pricing enables. Really sophisticated price discrimination is how an economist
Sure.
would think about it. And look, the Washington Post, if you log in to read, they know a lot about you, right? They know if you like the lifestyle section or the sports section, although I think maybe they got rid of their sports section, or the national section, or the politics, or the economics, or the foreign policy, right? So they know a lot about you. They know how often you log in. They know how many articles you read. They know if you click on the ads, right? If you click on the banner ads, if you click on the pop-ups, things like that. So there's a lot of opportunity to sort of use your buying patterns, your disposition, your enthusiasm for the product, and turn that around against you and charge you more if they think that they can.
Well, now you use the term surveillance pricing. When
Yeah.
I was kind of prepping for the interview, I was getting a little bit confused. Is there
Yeah.
AI pricing and surveillance pricing? I know that they kind of go together, but is what
Yeah.
Instacart did also surveillance pricing? Is that just a synonym for this, or is there sort of two different types of approaches where one is surveillance and one is not so much?
So it's getting really complicated
Okay,
because these companies are merging together a number of different pricing techniques that used to be separate and also used to be rare. But here's what I would say. I think there are three pricing strategies that are being deployed. The first is surveillance pricing, which is really personalized pricing. So using information about you, either directly from you or that they may be purchased from a third party to learn about you, or maybe that they're inferring about you. They don't know for sure, but they think you seem like a kind of, guy, right? They have a sense of where you live, right? Where you log on from, your IP address, and they're inferring things about you and using that to set a price. So that's personalized pricing, which I think, more accurately we might refer to as surveillance pricing. The second thing we're seeing a lot of is what's called dynamic pricing. And dynamic pricing is really the idea of changing prices according to things that are unrelated to you as the consumer, but more broadly in the kind of macro environment. So usually we use dynamic pricing to manage scarce resources.
Mhm.
Airlines use dynamic pricing. There are only a
Right.
few seats left on the plane. You're going to pay more. There's only one seat
Mm.
left on the plane. You're going to pay a lot more. But now we're seeing dynamic pricing in all sorts of settings where goods are not scarce. So there was a really interesting story last summer in the Nevada Review Journal where some interns for the paper went to the casinos and into the sundry stores to see if the price of items like sunscreen and beer and energy drinks and things like that changed, and they did. And that wasn't because Caesar's Palace was running out of sunscreen. It was because Caesar's Palace thought, oh, it's a hot day. I can sell sunscreen at a higher price point. So that's dynamic pricing, which is really when pricing isn't set according to characteristics of you, but shifts in the larger macro economy. Then we have what Instacart is doing, which I would argue is it's neither dynamic pricing. Kroger wasn't running out of Cheerios, nor surveillance pricing. They weren't using individual characteristics of me. They were just running a massive pricing laboratory. You could call it A/B testing. I think I like to call it like high frequency pricing. It's just a kind of new frontier enabled by cloud computing and AI and machine learning, where these companies can really deploy large scale pricing experiments across e-commerce platforms in ways that they would never be able to do in a brick and mortar store, right? Um,
So now I just have a couple minutes left with you, so I want to be respectful of your time. But I have like 2,000 more questions. So the unfair question, the very last question I want to ask you that I've been asking all of my guests lately, and nobody has an answer. But are we going to be okay? It's a very unfair question, but because I don't think people are hearing this, I don't think they're aware of this
yeah.
now, and we're so hyper focused on everything else as we obviously need to be, right? We have a war right now. We have the Epstein files. So this is all kind of happening under the multitude of catastrophic distractions that we're dealing with, right? It's hard to get through. So are we going to be okay? Are you guys? I know you guys are doing good work, and you're trying to bring this to our
Yeah.
attention. Is there ever going to be any legislation? I know New York. There's been a little bit in New York, but are we going to? Are we going? Is there going to be legislation at any point? And then what can? There's what you're doing. There's the legislative piece, and what on earth? I envision like we all get on social media and start like telling everybody, like outing them. Like I envision
Yeah.
this massive social media campaign where citizens are just like, Walmart charged me this. What did they charge you?
Yeah.
But other than that, what do we do, and are we going to be okay? I guess that's my two questions.
Look, narrowly, when it comes to this type of pricing and this sort of new frontier of really sinister and exploitative pricing, I do actually feel like something is stirring and the tide is maybe turning. I didn't feel that way up until really late last year when I saw Instacart, really brought to its heels by 400, consumer citizen
Mm.
shoppers who helped run this experiment that ultimately got the company to reverse course. But consumer revolt, consumer boycott has been throughout history a really important part of how Americans win protections and rights in the consumer space. Of course, it helps to have laws too to protect, more broadly. But I do think consumers raising their voice on platforms like TikTok, in Reddit chains, kind of exploring what's happening. Is this happening to you? Is this happening to you? Is a really important first step and sometimes is sufficient. But also, studies like the Instacart study, conversations like this one about Walmart, they really are on policymakers' radars. And we have seen really a flourishing body of state legislators taking up this legislation to ban practices like surveillance pricing, like some of these more nefarious dynamic pricing practices in a whole host of states. So, we don't have governors signing these laws yet, but we have them passing House and Senate chambers and being brought forward for hearings in places like Michigan and Illinois and California and New York, Pennsylvania. We just got an invitation to testify on some surveillance pricing legislation in Honolulu, which was
Oh, wow.
unfortunately a virtual invitation,
Oh,
not
that would
a
work.
because
Yeah, it
we would have
sucks.
loved to have sent someone on the team
Anything at the
on that
federal level, at
adventure.
all yet?
Yeah, so Ruben Gallego, who is a senator from Arizona, and Greg Casar, a House member from Austin, Texas, have both introduced federal legislation. We haven't seen a ton of movement yet, but actually, there's some interest in some of the oversight committees on a bipartisan basis in um, inquiring about and taking a look at some of the companies who use practices like these. And I do actually think there may be some CEOs hauled before Congress soon to answer some important questions. Delta, for instance, got in some trouble last summer for partnering with an Israeli artificial intelligence company called Fetcher to help it price airline tickets more aggressively and more expensively. And I think there was a lot of interest from Congress on both sides of the aisle in hearing a little more about what that partnership entailed and what it meant for consumers. Obviously, right now, so expensive to fly, particularly because of the Iran war. So I think consumers' interest in watching a company like Delta, frankly, gild the lily is pretty
Oh, yeah.
minimal. Yeah.
Sure. And I actually think this might be, I mean, I'm not one to expect much at any given moment from the president. I'm obviously more of a progressive influencer, but I feel like at the right moment, the right time, the right hour, at the right day, under the right set of circumstances, if God willing, you get a meeting with him, Republicans would do this would change. You could see some legislation move in a heartbeat. It's because this could be populist, and this could be
Yeah.
something that could benefit his poll numbers. So who knows?
I
We'll
mean,
see.
Instacart was on the cover of the New York Post.
Well,
I mean, that is not a lefty outlet, right?
not
I
at
mean,
all.
this
Not
was getting a lot of attention in right wing channels, and the Federal Trade Commission under Trump, said that they were launching an investigation. Like, has that investigation happened? Will we ever know anything about it? I don't know, but
right.
I think you're right that the issue itself gets both parties out of their seat and sort of on the field.
It does. I mean, and I think you might. There's a little bit of headwinds because of the way the Republican Party is looking at the AI thing right now with no
Yeah,
regulatory structure. But again, this
yeah,
is nothing is as it seems right now in
yeah,
Washington. So
yeah.
everything is gray. So thank you so much. Thank you for the work you're doing, first of all, and thank you for making us aware of this. Like I said, I have a lot more questions. I hope we can do this again,
Yeah, I'd love to.
because I have questions about inflation and the 2024 election and this happening then and Kamala
Oh,
Harris,
great. Yeah.
all kinds of things that I just didn't get to today. But thank you for joining us, and thank you for the good work you're doing. I so appreciate it, and I know we all do.
Oh, thanks so much for having me on. This was a great conversation and very happy to do it again.
Awesome. Take care, Lindsay. Be well.
Thanks.
Bye bye.